A poor student named Lena Parker rushed across the cracked sidewalk outside Cleveland Community College when she saw a small wheelchair trembling near the stairs, never imagining that the simple act of helping a paralyzed boy she had never met would pull her straight into the hidden world of a CEO billionaire whose identity she was completely unaware of. The boy, 8-year-old Evan, thin, pale, struggling to move his hands, looked terrified as students walked past him, ignoring the wheelchair that had jammed against a broken tile, but the poor student dropped everything, even her overdue assignment, to kneel beside him with the kind of pure kindness that only comes from someone who has nothing yet still gives everything. Her fingers trembled from exhaustion. 2 jobs, unpaid tuition, skipped meals, but she still smiled gently at Evan, adjusting his seatbelt, wiping dust from his knees, and shielding him from the cold breeze as if she had known him her whole life. And while she talked to him softly, steadying his shaky breath, she remained painfully unaware that hidden behind the tinted window of a black SUV nearby was Evan's father. A ruthless yet broken CEO billionaire whose name shaped city skylines, a man who had watched countless people turn away from his disabled son, but had never seen anyone, especially a struggling poor student, stop with such compassion. The billionaire's hand froze on the door handle as he watched Lena fight for Evan's dignity, unaware she was being watched, unaware her life was about to collide with unimaginable power, unaware that helping a paralyzed boy would unlock secrets, fortunes, and a shocking chain of events that would soon make the world around her completely unrecognizable. But why was Evan alone on campus? Why did the billionaire father hide instead of stepping out? Why did this poor student's kindness shake a man whose empire feared him? And what happened next after she touched the life of a child who couldn't walk? Something that would make anyone watching absolutely speechless. The morning Lena Parker woke up with a pounding headache, she didn't know that fate had already placed a small, trembling boy directly in her path. All she knew was that her stomach was empty again, that the water heater in her tiny dorm room had finally died, and that she had 30 minutes to sprint across campus before her professor closed the door on her final submission. But even with exhaustion pressing on her bones, Lena moved with the quiet determination of someone who had learned long ago that nobody else was coming to rescue her. She tightened the fraying strap of her backpack, felt the outline of the overdue rent notice inside, and pushed through the campus courtyard. Students hurried past with earbuds in, warm lattes in hand, complaining about things she wished she had the luxury to worry about. Lena tucked her chin against the cold. She had learned to blend into the background, to navigate the world invisibly, but today visibility found her first. Because just ahead, beside the cracked ramp outside the science building, sat a wheelchair angled dangerously toward the staircase. A small boy was inside it. 8 years old at most. Frail. Shoulders curled in fear. His arms trembled as he tried to reach the wheel, but his fingers kept slipping off the rubber. No one looked twice at him. Not the sorority girls brushing past. Not the athletes weaving around him. Not the boy on his skateboard who nearly clipped the footplate. But Lena stopped mid-stride, feeling something inside her twist sharply, as if the universe had gripped her shoulder and whispered, "Go to him." She dropped to her knees beside the boy without thinking. "Hey," she breathed softly, brushing wind-blown hair from his forehead. "You okay?" The boy swallowed hard. His voice was small, shaky. "My wheel, it got stuck. I can't move it." Lena glanced at the jammed tile beneath the wheel and saw the panic in his eyes. Not just discomfort, fear. A fear she recognized too well. The fear of being helpless in front of people who don't care whether you're hurting or not. She had lived that fear too many times. "It's all right," she whispered. "I've got you." She braced her hands on the wheel. The metal was icy under her palms, but she pushed anyway, feeling it resist before suddenly clicking free. The boy gasped in relief, his shoulders sinking back. "There," she smiled. "You're safe." His breath was still unsteady. "Thank you." Nobody else stopped. Lena's chest tightened. She didn't know why it hurt so much to hear that, except that she had once been that forgotten kid too, standing in crowded rooms waiting for help that never came. "People get busy," she said gently, though bitterness rested beneath her tongue. "But you deserve to be seen, sweetheart." The boy's eyes, big, blue, quietly haunted, lifted to hers and something flickered between them. Not recognition. Not familiarity. Something deeper. A quiet understanding of loneliness. "My name is Evan," he whispered. "Lena," she replied. She noticed then that his jacket wasn't fastened properly. The wind was cutting through it, chilling his already fragile frame. She tugged it closed and secured the zipper with careful fingers. Evan's lower lip trembled, not from the cold but from emotion. "You're very kind," he said in a voice that cracked like thin ice. Lena forced a smile, ignoring the sharp stab in her stomach that came from knowing kindness didn't pay bills, didn't guarantee safety, didn't bring back anyone she had lost. But she still gave it freely because she remembered being helped once, by a stranger whose face she barely remembered, after her mother died and the world went cold. As she steadied Evan's breathing, a black SUV idled 30 feet away, the engine humming quietly. Lena didn't notice it. She didn't see the silhouette behind the tinted glass. She didn't know a billionaire's heart was breaking and healing all at once as he watched the scene unfold. Inside the SUV, Alexander Reed, CEO of the trillion-dollar Reed Dynamics, a man known for buying corporations with a signature and crushing competitors with a sentence, sat frozen. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled slowly around the door handle. He wasn't used to trembling, yet his hand shook now. His security guard waited beside him. "Sir," the guard murmured, "do you want me to assist?" Alexander shook his head because he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He could only watch. Because no one had ever knelt for his son like that. No one had ever stopped. They stared, judged, whispered, pitted, but nobody had touched Evan with tenderness in years. Ever since the accident that had left him paralyzed, people treated him like something fragile, breakable, inconvenient. But this poor student, this girl in a torn hoodie and worn-out sneakers, was treating Evan like he mattered. Alexander leaned forward, breath caught in his throat as Lena brushed leaves from Evan's lap, her hands slow and gentle. He had seen employees grovel for promotions, investors fake kindness for leverage, rivals pretend empathy to weaken him. But what he saw here wasn't manipulation, wasn't performance, wasn't self-interest. It was pure humanity. Raw, unfiltered. And it shook him. Evan's eyes brightened as he stared at Lena, and for a moment, Alexander felt jealous of the warmth his son was directing toward a stranger, a warmth Evan rarely showed him anymore. He exhaled shakily. "Who is she?" he whispered. His guard frowned. "We don't know her, sir." Alexander's gaze sharpened. "We will," he murmured. Outside the SUV, Evan's wheelchair creaked slightly as Lena repositioned it. She brushed the last speck of dust from his sleeve. "Where were you trying to go?" she asked. Evan hesitated, then looked down. "My dad said he'd be right behind me, but I think he got busy." Lena didn't know the weight that sentence carried. The guilt. The years of therapy. The fractures in a powerful family. The shadows of tragedy that neither the world nor Lena knew anything about. She just saw a lonely boy trying to be brave. "You're not alone now," she said softly. "I'm here." Evan's eyes shimmered. Inside the SUV, Alexander Reed felt something inside him crumble. Something he hadn't felt in years. Oh. And a dangerous question began forming in his mind. Who is this girl, and why does she make my son feel safe when billions of dollars couldn't? Lena had no idea her life had just changed. She had no idea eyes were on her. She had no idea she was about to step into a world she had never imagined. She only knew she couldn't leave a hurting child alone. And that single decision would soon make everyone involved absolutely speechless. Evan's small fingers curled tighter around the armrest as Lena gently turned his wheelchair toward the courtyard benches. She didn't want him sitting near the cracked ramp again, not where students brushed past without noticing him, not where the wind cut across the uneven concrete and made him shiver. She guided him toward a sunnier spot, one where he could feel warmth on his face instead of cold fear on his skin. "Is this better?" she asked softly. Evan nodded, though his eyes kept flicking uncertainly toward the parking area. There was a heaviness in his silence, something too deep for an 8-year-old to carry. Lena noticed it but didn't push. She understood quiet pain. She lived with it too. "Would you like a snack?" she asked, pulling a slightly crushed granola bar from her pocket. Her stomach grumbled the second she touched it, reminding her she hadn't eaten. But Evan needed it more. She held it out. His eyes widened. "That's your only one." Lena blinked, surprised he noticed. "You can have it," she said. "But you're hungry," he whispered, staring at her with a softness that made her heart twist. "It's okay," she smiled. Heroes need energy more than tired college students. Something flickered in his eyes, an ache, a longing, maybe even guilt. But he took it carefully, unwrapping it with trembling fingers and chewing slowly as though savoring each bite. Behind them, the black SUV door suddenly opened. Evan jolted. Lena turned too, expecting maybe a driver, maybe a concerned parent rushing over. Instead, a sharply dressed man stepped out, towering, broad-shouldered, polished like someone who belonged on magazine covers or corporate billboards. His presence pulled the air tighter, like he carried storms inside him. His eyes, cold gray and restless, locked first onto Evan, then onto her. Lena felt her pulse jump. Not in fear, yet, but in confusion. Alexander Reed didn't speak. Not immediately. He just stood there, staring at the young woman kneeling beside his son, his breath unsteady for reasons he couldn't explain even to himself. "Dad?" Evan whispered, shrinking slightly. Lena's brow softened. "This is your father?" She didn't say what she thought, that he looked too powerful, too distant, too controlled to be the father of such a fragile child. Something about them didn't match, like two puzzle pieces from different boxes. Alexander stepped closer. His shoes were expensive. His suit immaculate. But there was a crack in his expression, a fracture that deepened when Evan wouldn't meet his eyes. "Evan," Alexander murmured, voice tight. "I told you to wait." "My will got stuck," Evan cut in quietly. "And you were far." Alexander exhaled sharply and closed his eyes for half a second. Guilt? Frustration? Lena couldn't tell. She rose slowly to her feet. "I helped him move away from the ramp," she said gently. Not confrontational, just explaining. He was scared. Alexander's gaze slid to her again, slowly, intensely, almost painfully, as if he was trying to understand something about her that didn't make sense. "You're Lena, right?" he asked. She frowned. How do you know my name?" His jaw twitched. He hadn't meant to reveal that. His security guard had told him minutes ago as he searched the college directory and student ID logs for the girl kneeling beside the wheelchair. Alexander Reed didn't like not knowing things. He didn't like unpredictability. But this girl's presence had unsettled him in ways he didn't recognize. "I overheard Evan," he lied quickly. Lena nodded, accepting the explanation even if it didn't quite fit. "You're kind," Alexander said suddenly, the words sounding foreign coming from him. As if he wasn't used to saying them, or feeling them. Lena blinked, startled. She had been called many things in her life, poor, struggling, behind on tuition. But kindness wasn't something people noticed often. Especially not powerful men in designer suits. "It was nothing," she murmured. "Anyone would've." "No," Alexander's voice was low, sharp. "Not anyone." His eyes drifted around the courtyard, landing briefly on students who now stared but pretended not to. He saw the apathy, the indifference, the way people turned away when they didn't benefit. But she hadn't. She had bent down. She had touched his son's trembling hands. She had given away food she needed herself. "You didn't walk past him," Alexander said. "You saw him." The air thickened between them. Evan clutched his granola bar tighter, watching the exchange with the anxious precision of a child who often saw adults interacting and worried about what it meant for him. Lena cleared her throat. "I should probably get to class," she said gently. "I have an exam today." "You're a student here?" Alexander asked even though he already knew. She nodded. "Trying to be." Those two words carried exhaustion, sacrifice, and the quiet desperation of someone fighting a losing battle against life. Alexander's gaze dropped to her backpack. The frayed strap, the faded fabric, the rent notice peeking from the zipper. He saw everything. Every struggle. Every bruise life had inflicted on her. He wasn't used to feeling helpless. He wasn't used to feeling anything he couldn't control. But right now, something in him twisted uncomfortably. "Lena," he said slowly, "would you mind walking with us for a moment? There's something I'd like to discuss." Evan tensed immediately. Lena instinctively placed a calming hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay. If you want me to stay, I will." Evan nodded quickly. Alexander noticed that too, that his son trusted this stranger more than him. It cut deeper than he let show. They began moving toward a quieter part of campus, Evan's wheelchair rolling steadily now. Lena pushed him gently, keeping pace with the billionaire whose identity she still didn't know. Alexander walked beside them, hands clasped behind his back, jaw clenched as though wrestling with a decision heavy enough to crack him open. Finally he spoke. "My son doesn't open up to many people," he said. "He's had a hard few years." Lena softened. "I can tell." Alexander glanced at her, studying her again. "When you touched his hand earlier," he said quietly, "he didn't pull away." Lena frowned. "Should he have?" "Most people make him nervous," Alexander said. "He senses when someone is pretending to care." Lena's steps slowed. "And you think I'm pretending?" Alexander's eyes snapped to hers. "No," he whispered. "That's the problem." Lena swallowed, unsure how to respond. Evan looked between them, confused and worried, licking crumbs from his trembling fingers. A gust of wind blew through the courtyard, rustling leaves across the pavement, and something unspoken settled heavily in the silence. Alexander inhaled deeply. "I need to ask you something," he said finally. Lena blinked. Okay. He hesitated for the first time, looking strangely fragile despite the intimidating aura he carried. Would you be willing to spend some time with Evan? He asked. Not today necessarily. But, regularly. Lena stared at him, stunned. Evan froze, eyes wide. Alexander continued softly. He trusts you. I haven't seen that in years. Lena felt the weight of the request pressing against the pounding of her heart. It wasn't what she expected. Not even close. And she didn't see the full picture yet, the secrets, the wealth, the storm she was walking into. But she felt Evan's small hand brush hers, hesitant, hopeful. And something inside her whispered that this choice would change everything. Lena didn't answer immediately. She stood there with her hand still lightly resting on Evan's shoulder, her breath caught between surprise and caution. Life had never given her anything that didn't come with strings, consequences, or silent costs. She knew better than to trust sudden opportunities, especially ones wrapped in soft voices and intense eyes from men who carried power like a second skin. But when she looked down at Evan, the decision that had been trembling in her chest settled into something steady. I'll help him, she said softly. If that's what he wants to. Evan's head tilted upward, his blue eyes shimmering with a relief so pure it struck her like a blow. The boy nodded quickly, eagerly, as if afraid that if he hesitated even for a second, the offer would be taken away from him. I want her to, he whispered. The words cracked something inside Alexander Reed, something that had been hardened by years of guilt, boardrooms, sleepless nights in hospital chairs, and the memory of metal twisting and screaming during the accident that had shattered his world. A tiny smile touched Evan's mouth, his first real smile of the day. Alexander breathed out slowly. Then it settled. Except nothing about it was settled. Not the tension in his shoulders. Not the bruised memories hidden behind his eyes. Not the storm of decisions building like unspoken thunder inside him. Lena didn't see all that, not yet. She only saw a father, stiff and uncertain, trying to build a bridge to a son who seemed both close and impossibly far. How often would you want me to be around? Lena asked. Alexander adjusted his cuff, an unconscious habit she'd seen wealthy businessmen perform in movies. As often as your schedule allows. I can compensate you for your time. No, Lena said quickly, shaking her head. Alexander blinked, surprised. No. I don't want money to spend time with him, she said gently. He's a child, not a job. Evan's lips parted, stunned. He'd heard that word, job, too many times from nurses who treated him like a checklist, tutors who treated him like an obligation, and relatives who pretended to care for the sake of inheritance expectations. But Lena's voice didn't have any of that in it. Her refusal was pure. She wanted nothing from him. Alexander swallowed hard, jaw tightening. He wasn't used to being turned down. Not by executives, not by politicians, not by anyone who saw what his wealth could offer. But this girl, this poor student with patched-up backpack straps and weary eyes, wasn't impressed by anything he could buy. He stared at her longer than he meant to, longer than he should have, trying to decipher what kind of human being said yes to a broken child and no to a billionaire. Finally he exhaled. All right. No payment. Evan tucked the empty granola wrapper into his pocket, looking thoughtful. Dad, can she come today? Alexander hesitated. Evan, she has class. She might be busy. Lena shook her head softly. Actually, I have a long break today. And then, before she could stop it, her stomach growled, loudly. Mortified, she clutched her bag to her chest. Evan giggled, covering his mouth. Alexander's eyes shifted sharply to her midsection, the tiny, betraying sound revealing more about her than the worn-out hoodie ever could. His expression darkened, but not with judgment. With realization. You haven't eaten, he said quietly. I'm fine, Lena insisted, cheeks red. I'll grab something later. You're not fine, Alexander said. And you're helping my son. The protective edge in his voice startled even him. Before Lena could argue, he motioned toward the campus cafe. Let me at least get you both lunch. Lena opened her mouth to refuse again, but Evan's hopeful eyes stopped her. Can we, Lena? He whispered. We can sit together. That tenderness crushed whatever protest she had left. Okay, she said gently. Let's go. They walked toward the cafe, the billionaire, the poor student, and the paralyzed boy in a wheelchair, drawing curious glances from everyone they passed. Students whispered behind raised hands. Some recognized Alexander Reed from news articles, business features, or the city's philanthropy events. Others just sensed the sharp contrast between him and Lena. But Evan kept looking up at her like she was the safest person in the world, and something in Alexander's chest tightened every time he saw it. Inside the cafe, the warm smell of coffee and fresh pastries wrapped around them. Students typed on laptops, music thumped quietly from a speaker, and Lena's stomach twisted again at the sight of food she couldn't afford. "Order anything," Alexander said. Lena hesitated in front of the menu. The cheapest sandwich was more than she spent on food in 2 days. She opened her mouth. "Anything," Alexander repeated, gently but firmly. She nodded and chose something simple. Evan requested chicken soup, his voice shy yet excited. Alexander ordered coffee but barely touched it when it arrived. They settled at a corner table. Lena helped Evan position his spoon properly, holding his wrist lightly to keep his hand steady. Alexander watched the touch with a mixture of gratitude and ache. "Does it hurt?" Lena asked Evan when his fingers twitched. He shook his head. "Not really. Just tired sometimes." Alexander closed his eyes briefly at that. He remembered doctors explaining nerve damage in words that sounded like a language invented to break him. He remembered the beeping machines, the emergency room chaos, the red stain on the car seat. He remembered the scream, Evan's mother's scream, right before the truck slammed into them. Lena noticed the flicker of pain in his eyes, but she didn't pry. She turned back to Evan, helping him carefully lift the spoon. Evan smiled, proud of himself. "You're good with him," Alexander murmured. Lena blushed. "He's easy to care for." "No," Alexander said softly. "He isn't. Not for most people." Evan's smile dimmed for a second, but Lena leaned closer. "Evan," she whispered, "you're not the problem. People just don't know how strong you are yet." The boy brightened instantly. Alexander swallowed hard. Something unspoken passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that this girl saw things even he had stopped seeing. As Evan ate slowly, carefully, Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying Lena with a seriousness that almost made her shift uncomfortably. "Lena," he said quietly, "there's something you should know about us." Lena lifted her eyes, a shiver running through her spine. Alexander inhaled sharply. "My family isn't ordinary. And once you step into Evan's life, you're stepping into mine too." Lena frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Alexander said, his gaze darkening with a truth she couldn't yet fathom, "helping my son will change everything for you." Lena's breath caught in her throat at the weight of Alexander's words, but before she could ask what he meant, Evan tugged gently at her sleeve. His little fingers trembled, but his eyes glowed with the quiet hope of a child who had finally found someone who wasn't afraid to touch his broken world. "Lena," he whispered, "can we go outside after lunch? The sun feels nice today." She smiled at him, soft and real. "Of course we can." Alexander watched the exchange, watched the innocence in Evan's voice and the warmth in hers, and felt something unfamiliar spreading through him, something terrifying in its gentleness. Something he thought he'd buried in the wreckage of twisted steel and blood the day the accident stole everything normal from their lives. They finished lunch slowly, with Evan telling short, breathy stories and Lena laughing in a way she hadn't allowed herself to laugh in months. When they stepped back outside, the autumn air had mellowed, sunlight stretching across the courtyard in long yellow lines. Evan blinked against the light, lifting his face as though he could feel the warmth seeping into his bones. Lena leaned down behind him. "Want to stroll for a bit?" He nodded, and she guided the wheelchair gently, careful not to let the wheels hit any of the uneven edges that had trapped him earlier. Alexander walked beside them, slower this time, quieter, as though something fragile had taken root inside him and he was trying not to crush it. They moved toward the quiet garden behind the library, where tall hedges softened the noise of the world. Evan breathed more easily here. Lena noticed instantly. "You like this spot?" she asked. Evan nodded. "Mom loved gardens." Alexander stiffened almost imperceptibly. Lena stopped walking, her hands tightening on the wheelchair handles. She hadn't asked about Evan's mother. She hadn't dared. But now the silence felt too sharp to ignore. "Evan," she whispered, "where is your mom?" The boy hesitated. His lips parted, then closed. He looked up at his father instead, waiting for permission. Alexander's jaw flexed once, twice. His eyes darkened with memories Lena couldn't see yet but could feel in the air between them. "She passed away," he said quietly. 3 years ago." The color drained from Lena's cheeks. She knelt beside Evan instinctively, her eyes softening. "I'm so sorry." Evan nodded, voice small. "The accident made me like this, and Mommy didn't make it." Alexander turned away slightly, his breath unsteady. Lena felt the shiver in Evan's words, the tremble under each syllable. She reached for his hand slowly, giving him every chance to pull away. He didn't. He curled his fingers into hers and held on. Alexander closed his eyes at the sight, because the one thing he had begged the universe for, night after night, was for someone to hold Evan's hand without fear. A long pause settled. Birds chirped softly nearby. The wind rustled the hedges. And then, for the first time, Alexander broke completely open. That day ruined both of us, he said, voice cracked and raw. The world kept calling me powerful, brilliant, a man who could fix anything with enough money. But none of it mattered. Not a single dollar could fix him. His voice slipped into something hoarse. Or me. Lena rose slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't pity him. She just stepped closer, close enough that Alexander felt her presence like a steady heartbeat beside his chaos. Her voice was soft but steady. You didn't ruin him, she whispered. You stayed. You're still here. The billionaire flinched as if her kindness was too sharp to touch. Evan wiped a tear from his cheek with difficulty. Lena helped him gently, brushing away what his small hands couldn't reach. Alexander turned toward her fully now, vulnerability stark in every line of his face. Lena, you don't understand. When you knelt beside him earlier, when you touched his hand, he didn't shake. He didn't freeze. He let you. Lena frowned softly. Maybe he just needed someone who wasn't afraid. Alexander's voice dropped lower. Or maybe he needed you. Before Lena could respond, Evan suddenly tugged her sleeve again. His fingers spasmed and he winced. Are you okay? She asked immediately. My legs hurt, he whispered. Alexander stepped forward, panic flashing across his eyes. What kind of pain? Like pins? Evan gasped. Lena's heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't just tiredness. Something deeper was happening. She knelt quickly and pressed her hands gently around his legs, feeling for temperature, for tension, for anything. Then, faintly, barely, Evan's right foot twitched. Lena froze. Wait. Evan, can you try that again? Evan focused, face scrunched. His lip trembled. His foot moved. Alexander fell completely silent. What was that? Lena whispered, breath shaking. It happens sometimes, Alexander said, but his voice sounded more like disbelief than explanation. The doctor said it wasn't intentional. But that looked intentional, Lena breathed. Evan, try again. Just try. The boy stared at her with all the determination left in his fragile body. And then, slowly, painfully, his foot shifted. Alexander stumbled backward, both hands gripping the air as though reaching for something invisible. His chest rose sharply, breath hitching. Lena covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. Oh my God, she whispered. Evan, you're fighting back. A sound escaped Alexander's throat, a broken, strangled sound that no billionaire in the world would ever want witnessed. He pressed a hand against his forehead, choking on air he couldn't seem to pull into his lungs. Years of hopeless nights. Years of specialists. Years of therapy sessions where nothing changed. Years of watching his son fade from a world he couldn't fully participate in. And now, a tiny spark. A twitch. A miracle. Triggered by kindness. Triggered by a moment of safety. Triggered by Lena. Evan blinked rapidly. Did I do it? Lena knelt and hugged him carefully, tears slipping down her cheeks. You did. You really did. Alexander stepped forward, voice trembling. Lena? She looked up at him. What happened today? He whispered, each word strained with a lifetime of fear and hope colliding. Is something I haven't seen in my son since before the accident. Lena swallowed hard. He's strong. He just needed someone to believe in him. Alexander shook his head slowly. No, Lena, he needed you. The garden fell silent again. Birds hovered on branches. Evan smiled through his tears. And Alexander Reed, a man worth billions, looked at Lena Parker, the poor student with nothing but kindness, and knew he was witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. He stepped closer, voice rough. Lena, if you stay in his life, if you stay in ours, everything will change. Lena felt her heartbeat stutter. Change how? Alexander's gray eyes softened, vulnerable and sincere. What happened today, he whispered, will make the whole world speechless. And for the first time in years, he wasn't talking about money. He was talking about hope.